Right, you gotta love the theme songs, right? You gotta love the music. If in my lifetime, I cannot tell you how many hundreds of times I have watched the movies over and over and over. I have read books by the score, and multiple times I have a bookcase out front just loaded with what's considered legends now, right? And there's nothing like the idea of that iconic lightsaber in your hand. Growing up as a kid, we went from cowboys and Indians to playing war to suddenly playing Star Wars, right? Yeah, I know it's a cheesy toy, but it's what I got for a couple bucks because we're looking for the props, right? The props to make the thing, make it worthwhile, make the game fun, relive our youth, relive what makes life exciting and fun. And in this case, for me, this was a holy grail when it came out. I'm just saying that I was the uber Star Wars fan. And prior to the role playing game, prior to West End Games producing this, I had my hands on a game system called Space Opera, and I made do until this came out. And this came out a few years later, so it was not much of a real wait, but it was. And I happened to be out at B. Dalton's the other day to my wife's birthday, and I took her out shopping, and we saw at the bookstore, and they have a 30th anniversary edition of this particular game system, and I didn't look at it close enough. I don't know if it's the actual D6 system, which this is, and a lot of people don't like the D6 system. I'm fine with it. I've never had a problem with it. I have played the D20 system version. Yeah, it's a little slicker, a little easier to play. I enjoy it. I can't say that. The core books belong to a friend of mine. I don't think I have them. I have to look through my collection, but I don't think I have them, which is, if I don't, maybe it's something I need to look into investing, because I never know when I was going to break out the Star Wars and play a campaign. The thing with it was, a lot of times we played Dungeons & Dragons, or we played something different. We played a number of different game systems, and a lot of my friends had game systems back in the day that I didn't have, and it was kind of on purpose. You don't always have the deep pockets. So if you have certain things and your friend has things that you don't have, and vice versa, you got to experience a wider range of possibilities. You also got an opportunity. If they really liked this particular game system, if they had something I'd never owned and I played it with them and I really got to like it, I found myself gradually investing in it because it hooked me, it grew me. This was something that came out. There was absolutely no need for me to be, because the claws. George Lucas had me hooked from the first time I seen the Star Destroyer rumbling out over the screen. When I was a kid, there was this huge movie theater. It was a duplex, if you will, called River Hills Riviera. It's now a big sports arena now, where the location of it was. It was unique in our region for a couple things. First one, to get Dolby surround sound. It had the largest seating capacity. Both of them, I think, River Hills was 600 and Riviera was 500. And the screen was it's 5 times the size of the largest screens we have now. I don't know. It was just huge. It curved slightly. The ambiance was something else. And I remember you could feel the vibration. They had the bass up enough that you could, when that Star Destroyer came rumbling out and just kept going and going, everything, you could just feel it in your bones. Everything's just rumbling as it come across. It was so impactful. It was so far away from my world and the trials and tribulations of my youth that I grasped onto it like a blanket. It was my comfort zone and my safe place in a time when nobody knew what that was and generally didn't care. I know that when the next installment came out, A New Hope, or Revenge of the Strike of the Empire, God damn it, Attack on Hoth, and I went and seen it. My friends and I skipped out, we skipped school with our parents' permission, and my mom dropped us off around noon and let us sit in line. The line doubled around the movie theater parameter and then went down the block, several blocks. There was thousands and thousands of people wanting to get in to see it. And there was only going to be 3 showings, one at 1 o'clock and so on and so forth. There were still so many of us out there when the 9 o'clock show ended that the theater decided to go ahead and continue airing it well into the night. And we got in at right before midnight and got to see it. And they were playing it at that point on in both theaters, so they were pushing 1,100 people every sitting, roughly. So that tells you how many thousands of people showed up in Iowa to go see The Empire Strikes Back. And the Return of the Jedi was just as impactful, but not necessarily as dramatic, because at that point they were showing in other theaters in town and there wasn't as nearly a long line. We got in pretty much the one we wanted to see at the time we wanted to see it. And I went back a dozen times. At the time that Return of the Jedi had come out, I had had my driver's license by then. I was employed, so I had the means to go. And I went, like I said, at least a dozen times. And I never saw something I didn't see. I always saw something different. I always felt I earned a little bit more nuance, something else. So, like I said, this particular game system holds a lot to my game history and my game psychology and my game mindset and who I am in some aspects in the gaming hobby. I can always throw together something pretty quick, and I love the modules. Most of them brought in elements. There's certain things about modules and adventure that are different depending on the game world. The ones that came out for a lot of the fantasy game systems didn't necessarily grip me. I could make my own and start in Dungeons & Dragons. I always wanted to make my own as a preferred to running a pre-made module. The Middle Earth from Iron Crown Enterprises was different because in their aspect, they were very, for the most part, well written, but they filled in, they were like a puzzle piece. They filled in a region or an area of the Middle Earth map that wasn't there in the source books. So they all tied together, they all worked together. So even if you weren't running a module as the module, you want the background information for it. So if your characters are passing through the area, you've got already pre-designed stuff, and it just adds to the overall backstory. Star Wars modules were quite similar in that aspect. There are a couple, marginal ones, and I will get to those eventually because I have quite a few. And then there were some that were very pertinent, and you could go back over and over and over again and utilize them either straight up as the module or as, like I said, background material, source material for your campaign that you've created. The role-playing game, and I'm not going to spend an hour trying to explain to you the nuances and the differences and so on and so forth because, well, if you want it, go get it. I don't know if you can, I can't really zoom in well, but do you see the price? West End Games, 40,001 Star Wars, $14.95. I was looking at core books for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition while I was at B. Dalton's, or Barnes & Noble, and $50 and up. $40 and up. The times have so much changed. And I grant you, this is not nearly as thick as the current ones, but I'll tell you, the new ones their graphics and their artwork, aren't any better or worse than what West End Games worked with. I mean, come on. There's an advertisement for joining the Imperial Navy, right? And it's very colorful. Of course, they had advantages because you have a lot of cinematic, actual photographs to work from, the movies and so on and so forth. The role-playing game itself, we have our introduction if you have no idea what Star Wars is about. We have the player section, the game master section, and the adventure section. So they tried to simplify it. I'm not going to explain how the rules work because that's not what this video is about. We have an introduction to role playing because eventually we began someplace new ourselves, and every now and then, maybe more often than not, depending on your your situation, you have new players, and some of the players have never played a role-playing game in their life, and having the means to kind of walk them through it, hold their hands through it, is always nice. So this is a what they call a solitaire adventure. So if anything else, you want something to do, you could play this, just entertain yourself for a little bit in the afternoon. Not tough, not hard, but also a good learning curve. It gives you an idea or working block stuff for creating your own campaigns. Game master section, introducing game mastering. You know, if becoming a new player in role playing games in general is a bit of a learning curve, a challenge. Becoming the game master is a larger. If you don't know that, it is a much larger curve than being a player, and it takes a different type of drive and mindset. There are far much more work to do as a game master to do it properly, and there are loads of videos on this subject. I've done a few myself, but there are thousands of videos on this subject by very influential and smart and savvy people out there, and just as many, by not so many, and I'm probably in that second category, right? It doesn't matter. So talking about attributes and skills and how they play out, that doesn't, like I said, we're not going into the depth on that. You know, not everybody is keen on the skill set as a means of propelling play, and I believe that they are tools to be utilized and give you a reference point or starting point, regardless if you're a player or the GM. It gives you the ability to know or find some answer to something if you are trying to figure out how to proceed in a certain event or action in a game. So chapter 3, combat, talks about how you visualize it. Keeping the pace up is probably one of the most challenging, because it can combat on the table can drag out quite long, especially when it's a constant series of dice rolls. And there are newer game systems that have streamlined that to some degree. You can still do that with a lot of use of common sense and other means, which once again I've done some videos on. A lot of other people have too, and I'm not going to rehash them there. Talk about using miniatures. I did a video on mine. I have quite a few miniatures for Star Wars, the old lead miniatures, which are no longer acceptable today. Wounds and healing. Chapter 5 is starships. You know, I've tried doing videos in the back where I focused on a particular set of rules or components and tried to do a video to, and it just never seemed to interest people, or somehow I always step on somebody's toes and they think I'm a total loon or jackass and they have no clue what I'm talking about, right? One of the things about fantasy games, for the most part, you get hurt, somebody uses magic, you're no longer hurt. So in the case of 20 minutes, you can almost die and then be fully functional when 20 minutes later to continue the adventure. In some sci-fi game systems, they try to find ways to mimic that, but for the most part, it doesn't. It takes longer. And if you were to naturally heal, if you didn't have access to the healing magics, and you had to take the healing skill and the healing process, it takes much longer. And you either have to leap forward, fast forward, or retire the character for a while. And it's a challenge, right? So we got a small chapter on starships, very basic stuff here, just to get you started. You know, they have other books, obviously, that have far more information, and we will cover those over time. Starship combat system rules on improving your ships, the force, right? What are you going to do with the force? I've also done videos on the subject. I've discovered as a game master, one of the biggest problems I have had with playing in Star Wars, when I have a force-sensitive player and a bunch of non-force-sensitive players, there's a tendency for the force-sensitive player to outshine everybody. And always suddenly the rest of the pack becomes supporting actors to the prime actor, or the opposite. I got a player who really doesn't understand. They're not Luke Skywalker, and they do not have, Yoda's capabilities. and try to continue to do things that they really are outside their parameter, and it causes problems for the rest of the group. Or they are so inept at playing a source character, they just really don't get it or can't play it well. In most cases, you can play it out. You can find a balance if you wish, and if you work at it, and your players are conducive to that. I just found it easier, the lazy man's way out, the lazy GM's way. It's just to say, okay, look, we're either going to have a force campaign or a non-force campaign. There may be in the non-force campaign, there may be force users out there, but they're not going to be your primary bad guys. And if anything, they're just back in the backstory or the one-off. You might need to go visit and talk to somebody, etc. In a force-based campaign, this is where everybody present has at least some connection to the force, and works sometimes better when you only got 1 or 2 players. I'm sure, I don't know how many of you have found yourself in a situation where you just got one player, one friend. You just don't have the time or the social resources to recruit a whole new pack of people, and you find yourself entertaining one other person. That lone Jedi is an awesome campaign option, because then we focus on the character and their development and their interaction, and everything else is support or a objective or some sort of obstacle, right? Just putting that out there. It is, like I said, what it is. Nobody's Yoda except Yoda, and we're not going to go into the great deal on how the mechanics work. Like I said, I like the artwork. It's obviously photo work, so I can understand the people making the argument, but there's still some good actual artwork. So we got Chapter 7, other characters, making up basically your NPCs and how to operate them. Droids as characters. Some players can play a droid character. Stock characters. This is ready to made, ready to play. So you don't have to go and do a whole lot of back work as a GM. You can use your standard template for the Stormtrooper, Specialist, etc., and just reuse it over and over again. And we get the adventure section. Chapter 1, running adventures. There is no right or wrong when it comes to running something in a game, as long as your people buy into it. If you are extremely adept at the genre, at the franchise, a lot of times you can ad lib and fire from the hip quite often, and your players will roll with it. And every now and then you get somebody who's a bit more of a stickler, or as a GM you want to be more of a stickler towards being focused. That's fine. Sometimes reading from a script is the only way some people can operate, and I've played both with and against those. I've had GMs who have to run from a script, and I have had players who cannot cope with an open sandbox. They get lost or confused or lose interest or get upset. And you have to know your player, you have to know your GMs, work within the rules, and if you're not comfortable with it, say your apologies and move forward and try to find somebody else. So but having a set of mechanics, and I don't care what game system you have, and I preach that a lot, is important, because I may not want to know how to force jump 3 floors. I just may decide the character is a Jedi Master. They don't need to make a dice roll to see if they're 6 active. It's only 3 floors. If they're going to go 6 floors, maybe we want to flip a coin, whatever, throw a dice, whatever. We can storyline it, or it's just an action that happens. It's a matter of what they say here: don't get bogged down in the details, right? But there are a lot of people who will argue that point. Anyway, players will be players. Win the fudge. That is a subject that's been discussed numerous times on many Facebook channels and other mediums. The Forge may have talked about it, and outfits like them. I know it gets brought up every now and then on the Facebook channels I follow, and when do we go off script? When do we change the dice roll? Do we change the dice roll? I sometimes can be a purist. Now that's makes me wishy-washy to some degree. A lot of times, I have absolutely no problem nudging a dice if it's not blatant. This is where the screens, the GM screens, come into play, or your little digital bones that you can make it roll and not show your opponent or your table, and or you just do it in your head, right? You know, the try not to do it after the fact, but if your players are in over their head, give them an out. If necessary, give them an obvious out. If they insist on that not being fair, play it out, right? The players generally are right if that's what you want to go with that aspect, but sometimes they're not right, and sometimes they miss all the clues and all the signs, and even the dancing Jawas with the neon placard saying "Don't do this" or "Don't go in there." They do it because, or out of spite, or because they're just totally oblivious, right? They made a poor decision, and that's just the way we have to roll. But we're not going to get bogged down in that one either, because I've done videos on it. They're on the channel somewhere. Right? Just saying. A lot of information, blah, blah, blah. Designing adventures. I get to say a lot on that subject, but I think I'll pass. Then we have a module included, the Rebel Breakout, the adventure for Star Wars role-playing game, the player's introduction. So this is an entry-level module right in the core book to be played out, and it has 6 useful information in here on a number of things that can be applied throughout your campaign many years later. And then we also including the nice impromptu base that the rebels are operating out of. I had numerous campaigns based off of just this and the material that was in here and how the rebels were doing whatever they were doing. Right? Adventure ideas. Class reunion. That's right. Class reunion. Pirate Prince, Rings of Brightwater, blah. Then you got your character sheets, templates for NPCs, generics, so on and so forth. Basics, my friends. Right? Okay. And as you notice, mine are still in my books. I learned hard lessons in my my teen years, my early teen years, of not taking this stuff out of the books. Better to go Xerox a copy or acquire. Now you're online, you can just get this stuff for free, leave it in the book, because once you take it out of the book, you're likely to lose it, increases by magnitude, or getting damaged. Just saying, right? Something once upon a time you could have ordered, but now probably not. Edition books, Paranoia. A friend of mine had that game and we played quite a bit. I liked it. Ghostbusters, we liked the movies, didn't so much the video. We did not get into the role-playing game part of it. The source book. The other holy grail I have, and I will do a video on at some point in the future. But this is my introduction to the Fat Man's Star Wars collection. West End Games, early edition stuff. Okay. I do not have any of the latest versions of these. Age of Empire, Age of Rebellion. I've seen those at the bookstores. I would love to have them, but it's a money thing. I mean, there were times in my youth, and this is a confession. There was times in my youth, in my early 20s and 20s, where this took precedence over a lot of other stuff. And I don't mean this particular thing, but the hobby in general. And I would spend back then $50, $60 a week. When you get a check for $200 and you're spending a quarter of it on this stuff alone, by today's standards, I was probably spending $100 to $150 a week. There goes most of my mortgage right there if I was trying to do that today. Now I try to space it out. I'm always looking for the used books from the older stuff because they're not used to me. They're new. If I don't have them and I couldn't get them back in the day, then they're still new to me, right? And whether it's Statco and early editions of Dungeons & Dragons you don't like, or it's the rules chunky heavy versions of Rollmaster and a score of other systems you don't like, the games are still valid. They're still useful. They're still fun. At the end of the day, they're still fun. That's a big reason why there was a huge old school renaissance over the last 3 to 5 years, right? Uh, Still is a little bit, but we don't talk about it as much, right? We're moving back into the new and shiny. It's so shiny. So, you know, is what it is, right?